I used to believe that my life with Tessa was the one thing in this world that didn't need a filter. We lived in a quiet, tree-lined suburb outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of place where the grass is always a perfect shade of emerald and the neighbors wave from their porches. Our marriage felt just as pristine. For 6 years, I woke up next to a woman I considered my North Star, a person whose honesty was so absolute, it felt like an anchor in an increasingly fake world. But last Tuesday, at exactly 4:18 p.m., a single selfie arrived on my phone and shattered that anchor into a million jagged pieces. It wasn't just a bad photo. It was a glitch in the matrix of my entire existence. It was the moment I realized that the woman I've been sleeping next to for 6 years doesn't actually exist. Tessa had been struggling, or at least that's what she told me, counting down the days until her 21-day retreat was over. I was the devoted husband, the one who kept the home fires burning while his wife went on a spiritual quest. I felt proud of our maturity, of our trust. I packed her bags, kissed her forehead, and watched her drive away in our SUV, promising her that I'd be here waiting when she found whatever it was she was looking for. We agreed on one rule, one photo a day. A proof of life selfie, sent whenever she trekked high enough to catch a stray bar of signal, just so I knew she was safe. The first few days were fine. I'd get a grainy shot of a cactus or a blurry sunset over the red rocks. I missed her terribly. The house felt too big, the silence too loud. I'd sit in our living room, staring at the empty space on the sofa where she usually curled up with a book, counting down the days until her 21-day retreat was over. I was the devoted husband, the one who kept the home fires burning while his wife went on a spiritual quest. I felt proud of our maturity, of our trust. I heard the horrific metal-on-metal screech. When I fished it out, it was mangled, twisted, and unwearable. Tessa had cried, and I had watched her walk to the trash can and drop both earrings inside. I saw the trash truck pick up that bag the next morning. Woke up late today just watching the afternoon sun dip over the hills. Missing you, Rhett. I smiled and started to type a reply about how beautiful she looked, but then I stopped. I zoomed in on her face just to see her eyes, and that's when the first crack appeared. The light was wrong. I'm a hobbyist photographer. I understand how shadows work. In the photo, the sun was hitting the bridge of her nose directly from above, creating short, sharp shadows under her chin. That's high noon sun. But the timestamp on the photo said 4:18 p.m. and her text said she was watching the afternoon sun dip. In the Arizona desert in October at 4 in the afternoon, the shadows should be long golden and stretching across the porch. This light was harsh white and vertical. It was the light of a midday sun, not a late afternoon in the desert. I felt a small, cold prickle of unease, but I brushed it off. I looked for the braided hoops, half expecting them to be there, but the slot was empty. Of course it was. She was wearing them in a photo she shouldn't have been able to take. One had fallen into the garbage disposal while it was running. I heard the horrific metal-on-metal screech. When I fished it out, it was mangled, twisted, and unwearable. Tessa had cried, and I had watched her walk to the trash can and drop both earrings inside. I saw the trash truck pick up that bag the next morning. How was she wearing them now, 300 miles away in a desert cabin? My breath hitched. I felt a bead of sweat roll down my spine, despite the air conditioning. I began to look at the photo, not as a husband, but as a detective. I looked past her smile, past the mountains, and into the glass door of the balcony behind her. The glass was dark, acting like a murky mirror. And there, in the very corner of the reflection, was a tiny distorted neon sign. It was a green circle with a blue bird. My heart stopped. That wasn't a desert landmark. That was the logo for Publix, a grocery store chain that doesn't exist anywhere near the Arizona desert. The nearest Publix was 3 blocks away from our house, right next to the local gym where we had a membership. I dropped the phone onto my desk as if it had turned into a live coal. The room seemed to tilt. I looked around our office, the shelves filled with our travel memories, the framed photo of our wedding on the wall, and suddenly everything looked like a prop. The silence of the house wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy and sinister. I sat there for what felt like hours, the blue light of the phone screen burning into my retinas. My mind was racing, trying to build a bridge of logic to cover the gap. Maybe she bought new earrings. Maybe it wasn't a Publix sign, but the sun. The sun didn't lie. The sun in that photo wasn't an Arizona sun at 4 p.m. It was a studio light, or a midday sun caught in a lie. I realized then that I didn't know where my wife was. She had driven away in our SUV. She was using our credit cards. She was sending me messages every night, but she wasn't where she said she was. And if she wasn't in Arizona, she was somewhere else playing a part. I stood up my legs feeling like lead. I needed to move. I needed to find something real. I walked down the hallway to our bedroom, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood. I opened her jewelry box. It was neat organized, just the way she liked it. I looked for the braided hoops, half expecting them to be there, but the slot was empty. Of course it was. She was wearing them in a photo she shouldn't have been able to take. I went to her vanity and opened the drawers. Everything looked normal: perfumes, makeup, hair ties. But as I pushed a tray of lipsticks aside, I saw a small silver object tucked into the very back corner. It was a thumb drive, unlabeled and cold to the touch. I took it back to the office, my hands shaking so violently I had trouble plugging it into the USB port. My computer chirped, acknowledging the new hardware. A single folder appeared on the screen: Drafts. I clicked it open and my world ended. There were hundreds of them: photos, videos, clips of Tessa Avery standing in front of a green screen. There were files labeled by date: Day 5, Desert Hike; Day 9, Morning Yoga; Day 14, Sunset Wine. I clicked on the one from today. It was a video file. I watched as my wife stood on a wooden platform. Behind her wasn't a desert, but a massive high-resolution LED wall displaying a loop of Arizona mountains. A man's voice, not mine, called out, "Higher on the mug, Tessa. Look more refreshed. Think about the peace you're finding." Tessa adjusted her grip on the white ceramic mug, tilted her head, and gave the camera that same beautiful, soulful smile she gave me every morning. "I'm finally finding myself," she whispered to the lens. "I'm finally away from the noise." The man's voice responded, "Perfect. That's a wrap on the desert sequence. Let's get the Parisian cafe set ready for the next batch. We need to get these scheduled before the weekend." I stared at the screen, watching the loop of my wife pretending to be at peace in a place she had never visited. This wasn't a retreat. This wasn't a digital detox. This was a production. She hadn't gone to Arizona to find her soul. She had gone to a studio to manufacture a version of her life that didn't include me. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean over the trash can. Every memory of the last 6 years began to rewrite itself in my head. Every time she had been working late, every time she had been at the gym, I wondered now if she was just on another set, filming another version of herself. I looked back at the screen at the folder labeled Project Ghost. I realized then that she hadn't just lied about a trip. She was planning something. You don't pre-record 3 weeks of your life unless you need to be invisible for those 3 weeks. You don't create a ghost of yourself unless the real you is busy doing something you can't show. I thought about our bank accounts. We had a joint savings account for our future house, a forever home we were supposed to buy next year. I logged into our banking portal, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The balance was $4.12. 3 weeks ago, there had been $85,000 in that account. The transaction history showed a series of wire transfers to an offshore account I didn't recognize. The name on the recipient line wasn't Tessa Dalton. It was a name I had never heard of, Cora Vance. I sat back in my chair, the darkness of the office closing in around me. I wasn't just a husband who had been cheated on. I was a man who had been erased. She had taken our money, she had taken her identity, and she had left me with a thumb drive full of digital lies. She was still sending me photos, still talking to me every night. But the woman I was talking to was a ghost, a pre-recorded phantom designed to keep me quiet while the real Tessa did whatever Cora Vance was supposed to do. I looked at the clock. It was nearly 6 p.m. In 2 hours, she would call me. She would tell me about her day in the desert, about the birds she saw, and the thoughts she had. And I would have to listen to a dead woman's voice, knowing that she was probably less than 20 miles away, sitting in a rented loft, waiting for the timer to go off on her next scheduled lie. I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. The grief was there, a dull ache in my chest, but above it was a cold, hard layer of ice. She thought she was the director. She thought she was the one in control of the narrative. But she had left the thumb drive. She had left the glitch in the photo. She had left a trail, and she didn't know I was on it. I stood up and grabbed my car keys. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew I couldn't stay in this house. This house was a set, and I was tired of playing my part in her play. I walked out to the garage, the air feeling thick and humid. I climbed into my car, not the SUV she took, but my old reliable sedan. I backed out of the driveway, looking at our perfect house in the rearview mirror. It looked like a dollhouse, empty and hollow. I drove toward the city center, toward the industrial district, where the GPS tag on the deleted photo had pointed. My hands were steady, now gripped tight around the steering wheel. I passed the Publix 3 blocks away, the green neon sign glowing mockingly in the twilight. I didn't stop. I kept going deeper into the heart of the city, toward the place where the desert was made of LED screens, and my wife became a stranger named Cora. The sun was finally setting for real now, casting long, bloody streaks of crimson across the sky. It was a real sunset, messy and unpredictable, nothing like the perfect loops on her thumb drive. I pulled into a gravel lot in front of a massive converted warehouse. The windows were blacked out with heavy curtains, but a sliver of light escaped from under the loading dock door. I turned off the engine and sat in the dark cabin of my car, the silence pressing in on my ears. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I looked at the selfie she sent me one last time, the smile, the earrings, the fake desert. Then I slid the phone into the glove box and stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots as I walked toward the heavy metal door of the warehouse. The metal handle of the warehouse door felt like a block of dry ice against my palm, a searing cold that grounded me in a reality my mind was still trying to reject. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I leaned my weight into the heavy steel, expecting it to be locked, but it yielded with a low, agonizing groan of neglected hinges. The sound was swallowed instantly by the cavernous space inside a vast darkness smelling of ozone stale coffee and the faint floral scent of the perfume I had bought Tessa for our last anniversary. Stepping inside felt like crossing the threshold into a different dimension. The industrial hum of massive cooling fans vibrated through the soles of my boots, a mechanical heartbeat, for a world made of wires and illusions. To my left, a stack of wooden crates was labeled rustic textures. And to my right, a row of mannequins stood like headless sentinels draped in clothes that looked hauntingly familiar. The sundresses, the hiking gear, the very outfits I had seen in those Project Ghost files. I moved deeper into the shadows, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't just a husband looking for his wife anymore. I was a man witnessing the autopsy of his own life. The warehouse was a labyrinth of half-finished dreams. I passed a corner that looked like a high-end Parisian cafe, complete with a tiny marble table and a backdrop of the Eiffel Tower. A few feet away, a patch of fake sand was littered with seashells and a beach chair. It was a factory of elsewheres, a place where you could be anyone anywhere as long as you had the right lighting and a convincing enough lie. Then I saw the glow. In the center of the warehouse, a cluster of high-definition LED panels stood like a glowing monolith, casting a harsh, artificial blue light across the concrete floor. It was the desert from the photo. Up close, the majestic Arizona mountains were nothing more than millions of tiny flickering pixels, a digital mirage designed to fool a husband's lonely heart. But it was the table next to the set that broke me. There, sitting under a focused spotlight, was a legal pad filled with Tessa's neat, cursive handwriting. I picked it up, my fingers trembling so violently the paper rattled. It wasn't a journal. It was a script. Tuesday, 8 p.m. call, the header read. Underneath, she had bulleted her emotional beats, like an actress preparing for a Broadway debut. 1. Mention the heat makes the exhaustion more believable. 2. Ask about the garden shows I'm still invested in home. 3. Cry softly at the 10-minute mark. Tell him I miss his scent. 4. End the call abruptly. Bad signal. Leaves him wanting more. I dropped the pad as if the ink were poison. The betrayal wasn't just in the fake location. It was in the premeditated theft of my empathy. She had mapped out my reactions, calculated my grief, and weaponized my love to buy herself time. I felt a surge of hot, searing bile rise in my throat. I had spent the last week agonizing over her safety, sending her "I love you" texts that she probably laughed at while checking her lighting. I needed to know more. I needed to find the why behind the how. I found a small makeshift office tucked behind the desert, set a plywood desk cluttered with hard drives and a dual monitor setup. I sat in the chair, the leather still warm, and woke the computer. It wasn't password protected. She was so confident in her invisibility, so sure of my gullibility, that she hadn't even bothered to lock the door to her soul. I opened a folder titled Financials, and the scale of the deception began to unspool like a horror film. There were spreadsheets detailing a crowdfunding campaign on a platform I'd never heard of, a private high-stakes site for investors in personal tragedies. The profile name was Cora Vance. The biography was a masterpiece of fiction. Cora was an orphan, a survivor of a decade-long abusive marriage to a man described as a volatile, controlling sociopath who had isolated her in a suburban prison. There were photos of Cora with expertly applied makeup bruises under her eyes, a split lip, a haunted stare. I leaned back, gasping for air. The man she was describing, the monster her followers were donating thousands of dollars to save her from, was me. Every kind gesture I had ever made, every "where are you?" text sent out of genuine concern. Every time I asked her to stay in for dinner, she had twisted it, documented it, and sold it as evidence of my cruelty. She wasn't just stealing our savings, she was harvesting my reputation to build a golden parachute for her new life. I clicked on a video file labeled Final Statement Rehearsal. The screen flickered to life. Tessa Nokora was sitting in front of a dark, nondescript background. She looked frail, her hair unwashed, her voice a fragile whisper. "If you're watching this," she said to the camera, her eyes brimming with tears that looked terrifyingly real, "it means I didn't make it. Rhett found me. He told me if I ever tried to leave, he'd make sure no one ever found the pieces. I'm recording this as my last testament. Please don't let him get away with what he's done to me." The video ended. I sat in the silence of the warehouse, the hum of the fans now sounding like a funeral dirge. She wasn't just leaving me. She was planning to destroy me. This retreat wasn't a getaway. It was a countdown to a faked disappearance that would end with me in a pair of handcuffs, accused of a murder that never happened while she sipped cocktails in a country with no extradition treaty funded by the pity of strangers. A cold, analytical part of my brain took over. The grief didn't vanish, but it was pushed aside by a primal need for survival. I began to download everything: the scripts, the financial records, the bruise tutorials, the green screen footage. My fingers moved across the keyboard with a precision I didn't know I possessed. I was a man drowning, and these files were my oxygen. I found a subfolder labeled Logistics. It contained a digital boarding pass for a flight to Zurich departing in 48 hours. The name on the ticket, Cora Vance. There was also a rental agreement for a small apartment in Switzerland paid for 6 months in advance. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. It was 7:45 p.m. In 15 minutes, my phone would ring. In 15 minutes, she would call me from her desert cabin and read from the script I had just seen on the table. She would tell me she missed my scent. She would cry at the 10-minute mark. I looked at the dual monitors, then at the LED wall, then back at the legal pad. A dark, jagged idea began to form in the ruins of my heart. She had spent months building this house of mirrors, convinced that I was just a blind man wandering through it. She thought she was the architect of my reality. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I didn't leave. I didn't call the police. Not yet. If I called the police now, she'd have a dozen ways to spin it. She was the victim. Remember, she'd tell them I tracked her down, that I was stalking her, that I was the monster she had described to her followers. I needed more than just files. I needed her to be the one to break the glass. I walked over to the soundstage and picked up the white ceramic mug. It was still damp from her last take. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it, the coldness of the porcelain. This mug had been in the photo. This mug was a witness. I looked around the warehouse, seeing it now not as a place of mystery, but as a weapon. I saw the tripod, the studio lights, the audio board. I saw the way the shadows fell across the fake desert. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my own phone. I looked at the proof of life photo she had sent me, the sun-drenched lie that had brought me here. My finger hovered over her contact name. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call her and demand to know how she could look at me every morning while planning my ruin. But I knew that would be a mistake. To win this, I had to be a better actor than she was. I took a deep breath, the air in the warehouse tasting of dust and deception. I walked back to the plywood desk and grabbed a small portable hard drive. I plugged it in and watched the progress bar as the evidence of her second life transferred into my possession. 10%, 20%. Each percentage point felt like a nail in the coffin of the woman I used to love. While the files transferred, I heard a sound from the loading dock area, the distinct heavy metallic click of a car door closing. My blood turned to ice. She was here. She wasn't in Arizona. She wasn't at a rental loft. She was coming back to her factory to film the next batch of lies. I looked at the computer screen, 60%. I looked at the exit, it was too far. The only way out was past the loading dock. I scrambled behind the large LED panels, pressing my back against the cold industrial frame of the Desert Mirage. I held my breath, the silence in the warehouse, now so absolute, I could hear the blood rushing through my ears. The heavy steel door groaned open. Footsteps, light, rhythmic, and confident, tapped against the concrete. I heard the rustle of a shopping bag, the jingle of keys, and then the flick of a light switch. A new set of overhead lights hummed to life, illuminating the warehouse. Through the gaps in the LED panels, I saw her. Tessa Avery was standing by the desk. She looked radiant, healthy, and completely unburdened. She dropped a bag of takeout on the desk right next to the computer where my hard drive was still blinking, still sucking the life out of her secrets. She reached up and unclipped her hair, letting it fall over her shoulders, and for a second, she looked exactly like the woman I had married. Then she picked up the legal pad, scanned her script, and let out a short, bored sigh. She reached for the computer mouse. My heart stopped. If she saw the hard drive, if she saw the transfer window, it was over. I gripped the ceramic mug so hard I thought it might shatter in my hand. But she didn't look at the screen. She reached past the monitor, grabbed a small vanity mirror, and began to apply a dark purplish tint to the skin beneath her left eye. She was getting into character. She was applying the bruises of a monster she had invented. I watched paralyzed as my wife meticulously crafted a wound on her face, humming a soft, cheerful tune to herself as she prepared to tell the world how much I had hurt her. The transfer bar on the screen reached 99%. My pulse was a deafening drum in the dark. She finished the bruise, checked her reflection, and gave a satisfied nod. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, the phone that was supposed to be in a desert with no signal. She tapped the screen, and I felt my own phone vibrate in my pocket. A soft, muffled buzz that felt like a gunshot in the silent room. She was calling me. She stood there less than 10 feet away, a fake bruise on her face, and a script in her hand waiting for me to answer the phone so she could begin the performance of a lifetime. I stared at the back of her head, the white ceramic mug still clutched in my hand, my thumb hovering over the accept button as the first ring echoed through the hollow space between us. The vibration in my pocket felt like a rhythmic electric shock, a physical tether to the woman standing mere feet away from my hiding spot. I stared at the silhouette of Tessa's head, watching the slight tilt of her neck as she held the phone to her ear, waiting for me to pick up. The irony was a bitter pill coating my tongue. She was calling her husband from a desert that didn't exist while I watched her through the gaps of a digital mountain range. My thumb moved with a mind of its own, sliding across the screen to accept the call. I pressed the phone to my ear, my breath shallow and silent, trapped in the narrow space between the LED panels and the cold brick wall. Rhett, her voice, came through the receiver soft, airy, and painted with a layer of manufactured exhaustion. In the warehouse, I saw her lips move a fraction of a second before the sound hit my ear. It was like watching a movie with the audio out of sync. She was leaning against the desk, her eyes fixed on the script she had written, her free hand tracing the edge of the fake purple bruise she had just painted onto her cheek. "I'm here, Tessa," I whispered. My voice sounded hollow, even to me. "How's Arizona?" It's intense," she said, letting out a practiced, shaky breath. The sun is so much stronger than I expected. But the silence, Rhett, it's doing something to me. I feel like I'm finally peeling away all the layers of the person I used to be. I watched her through the gap. As she spoke those words, she reached for a bag of salt and vinegar chips and popped one into her mouth, chewing silently while waiting for my reaction. The callousness of it was breathtaking. She was describing a spiritual rebirth while snacking on junk food in a dusty warehouse less than 15 miles from our bedroom. I bet it is, I replied, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the white ceramic mug. I saw the photo you sent. You looked different. Those earrings really caught the light. I saw her freeze. Her hand stopped halfway to the chip bag. She squinted at the computer monitor, likely pulling up the photo she had sent me earlier. For a heartbeat, the air in the warehouse seemed to thin. I could hear the hum of the cooling fans growing louder, a mechanical roar in the sudden tension. The earrings, she asked, her voice hitching just slightly a tiny crack in the armor. Oh yeah, I found them at the bottom of my travel bag. I must have forgotten I packed them. They're just old junk, really. Right, I said. Old junk. It's funny how things you thought were gone forever just reappear when you least expect them. She let out a nervous, airy laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Through the gap, I saw her pace the small circle of light around the desk. She was agitated now, her internal script failing to account for a husband who noticed the details. Anyway, it's getting dark here, and the signal's starting to drop. I just wanted to hear your voice. I miss your scent, Rhett. I miss home. I watched her check her watch. She was hitting the 10-minute mark. Right on cue, she began to sniffle. The transition was seamless, a masterclass in manipulation. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a choked sob that would have broken my heart 24 hours ago. I have to go, she whispered, her voice trembling with a grief she had practiced in the mirror. The mountains are swallowing the sun. I love you. I love you too, Cora, I said. The silence that followed was absolute. I saw her hand drop the phone as if it had suddenly turned into a viper. She stood perfectly still, her back to me, the fake mountain range glowing behind her like a neon tombstone. The name hung in the air between us, a jagged shard of truth that had sliced through her carefully constructed fiction. "What did you call me?" she whispered, not into the phone, but to the empty warehouse. I didn't answer. I watched her turn slowly, her eyes wide, scanning the darkness beyond the studio lights. She looked small in that moment, a child caught in a lie, but the purple bruise on her face reminded me that she was a predator. She reached for the heavy flashlight on the desk, its beam cutting a sharp, violent path through the shadows. "Rhett!" She called out, her voice no longer soft. It was sharp, cold, and demanding. "Rhett, I know you're here. I can smell your cologne." I pressed myself harder against the wall, my heart hammering so loud I was sure it would give me away. The beam of the flashlight swept over the crates, the mannequins, and the Parisian cafe set, moving closer and closer to the LED wall. She was hunting me in the house of mirrors she had built. I looked at the computer screen. The transfer was done. The hard drive was sitting there, a small silver brick containing the death warrant of her new life. I needed to get it. If she found it first, the evidence was gone. She moved toward the desert, set the gravel of her fake landscape crunching under her boots. Is this what you wanted Rhett to sneak around in the dark to prove how controlling you really are? This is exactly why I'm doing this. You can't just let me be. Her voice was changing. She was slipping back into the Cora persona, the victim of the volatile sociopath. She was rehearsing her next video in real time, even as she hunted me. It was chilling. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of losing the narrative. I moved. As her flashlight swept toward the back of the warehouse, I lunged from behind the panels toward the desk. I grabbed the hard drive, the cord snapping as I yanked it free. The light whipped around. The beam caught me full in the eyes, blinding me. "Found you," she said. Her voice wasn't filled with fear. It was filled with a terrifying, calm resentment. She stepped out of the desert and into the office light, the flashlight still trained on my face. With the purple bruise and the disheveled hair, she looked like the victim she had sold to the world, but her eyes were as hard as flint. "You shouldn't have come here, Rhett," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. This was going to be clean, a clean break. You'd be the tragic widower, and I'd be free. Why do you always have to ruin everything? A tragic widower. I spat the words, tasting like copper. You were going to fake your own death, Tessa. You were going to let the world think I killed you. You stole our life. You stole $85,000 of our future. That wasn't your money, she shrieked, the mask finally slipping. That was my payment for 6 years of playing the perfect wife in this boring suburban hell. I earned every cent of that by pretending to love a man who thinks a forever home is a reward. She stepped closer, the flashlight trembling in her hand. Do you think anyone will believe you? Look at me, Rhett. Look at my face. She pointed to the fake bruise. I've already told them. 500,000 people have seen the monster you are. If you leave this building with that drive, I'll call the police. I'll tell them you broke in. I'll tell them you attacked me. Who do you think they'll believe? The crying woman with the bruised face, or the husband who tracked her down to a dark warehouse? She was right. In this room, under these lights, she was the director. She controlled the shadows. I looked at the hard drive in my hand, then at the LED wall behind her. The Project Ghost files were my only weapon, but she was already writing the scene where I stole them. You're sick, Tessa, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and profound loss. You've spent so much time playing Cora that you've forgotten how to be a human being. Human beings are boring, Rhett. Human beings get stuck in Charlotte with a mortgage and a husband who doesn't realize his wife is a genius. She smiled, then a cold, jagged expression that made her look like a stranger. Give me the drive, now, or I'll make sure the last thing the world remembers about you is the sound of the cell door closing. She reached out her hand, her eyes locked on mine. For a long, agonizing moment, the warehouse was silent. I looked at the woman I had loved, the woman I had packed lunch for, the woman I had planned a future with, and I realized she was already gone. She had been gone for years. I didn't give her the drive. I backed away, moving toward the Parisian set. She followed me, the flashlight beam bouncing off the Eiffel Tower backdrop. There's nowhere to go, Rhett. I've already scheduled the next post. If I don't check in by midnight, the escape fund triggers a police alert. You have 3 hours to decide if you want to be a hero or a prisoner. I reached the edge of the set, my hand brushing against the small marble table. My fingers found the white ceramic mug I had been carrying. It was heavy, solid, and real. I'm not a hero, Tessa, I said, my voice regaining its strength. And I'm not a monster. I'm just the man who knows where the Publix is. I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and ran, not toward the loading dock, but toward the back of the warehouse into the maze of mannequins and crates. I could hear her boots pounding the concrete behind me, her voice screaming my name, no longer a whisper, but a raw, jagged sound of fury. I dodged behind a stack of rustic backdrops, the flashlight beam cutting through the air just inches from my head. I wasn't trying to escape the building yet. I knew the loading dock was the only way out and she'd get there first. I was looking for something else. I was looking for the heart of the machine. I found the main electrical panel for the warehouse tucked behind a row of headless mannequins. My hands moved by instinct. I gripped the heavy iron lever, the cold metal biting into my skin. Rhett, don't be a fool. Her voice echoed from the darkness. She was close. I could hear her breathing ragged and fast. I looked at the silver hard drive tucked into my belt, then at the lever. The play is over, Tessa, I whispered. I slammed the lever down. The warehouse plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The hum of the fans died instantly, replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like it was pressing against my chest. The only light was the tiny dying glow of the LED panel's backup capacitors, casting a ghostly flickering purple light over the fake desert. I heard her stumble a sharp gasp of surprise, followed by the clatter of the flashlight hitting the floor. Rhett, she called out, her voice finally tinged with a real unscripted fear. Rhett, it's dark. I can't see. I didn't move. I stood in the absolute blackness, my eyes adjusting to the dim purple glow of the desert. I could see her silhouette, now a small, dark shape, standing in the middle of her digital mirage. She was turning in circles, her hands outstretched, searching for a wall that wasn't there. I moved silently, my boots muffled by the dust. I wasn't leaving. I was going back to the desk. I had the hard drive, but I needed one more thing. I needed her to say it. I needed the confession that the Cora persona would never admit. I reached the desk in the dark, my fingers finding the small portable recording device she used for her voice memos. I felt for the button, the tiny red light blinking like a heartbeat in the gloom. I'm still here, Tessa. I said, my voice coming from the shadows to her left. She spun toward me, her face pale in the dying purple light. Give me the drive, Rhett. Please. We can talk about this. I'll give you half. 40,000. You can start over. We can both be free. Free? I asked, moving to her right. Is that what you call this? You were going to frame me for your murder, Tessa. You were going to let me rot in a cell while you lived off the pity of strangers in Switzerland. How is that freedom? I had to, she screamed, her voice cracking. You wouldn't have let me go. You're too stable, Rhett. Too boring. You would have tried to fix me, to save me. I didn't want to be saved. I wanted to be someone else. She was crying now, but there was no script this time. The tears were angry, jagged things. She was standing on the edge of her fake balcony, the Grand Canyon flickering out behind her. I hated every minute of it, she yelled into the darkness. Every dinner, every "how was your day," every time you touched me. I felt like I was disappearing. Cora is real. Tessa was the lie. I created Cora, so I could finally breathe. So the bruises were fake? I asked, my voice low. The stalking, the fear, all of it. Just a production. Yes. She hissed, her face inches from where I stood in the shadows. And it worked. They love her. They care about her more than you ever could, because she has a story, Rhett, and you. You're just a footnote. She reached out blindly, her hand grabbing my shirt. Her eyes were wide, the purple light reflecting in her pupils like twin galaxies of malice. Give me the drive or I'll scream. I'll scream so loud the neighbors will hear. I'll tell them you're killing me right now. I looked down at her hand, then up at her face, the fake bruise, the real tears, the woman I no longer knew. I reached out and gently removed her hand from my shirt. The neighbors won't hear you. Tessa, I said quietly, this warehouse is soundproofed. You made sure of that when you built your studio. I stepped back into the absolute darkness, the recording device in my pocket, still blinking its tiny red eye as she stood alone in the center of her dying desert, the pixels finally fading to black. The silence that followed her confession was heavier than the darkness itself. It was the kind of silence that exists only after a long, exhausting performance finally reaches its curtain call. I could hear Tessa's ragged breathing, a sharp, desperate sound that skipped and fluttered in the void where our life used to be. She was still standing in the center of the warehouse, a shadow among shadows, stripped of the digital mountains and the studio lights that had given her a soul. It's over, Tessa, I said. My voice was barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo off the distant metal walls like a thunderclap. I didn't wait for her to find her voice again. I moved with a strange, numb purpose, guided by the muscle memory of the hours I'd spent navigating this labyrinth in the dark. My hand stayed deep in my pocket, gripping the recording device as if it were a talisman. Every word she had just spat the admission of the fake bruises, the planned frame-up, the cold hatred for our boring life was etched into the digital memory of that machine. I made my way back to the main electrical panel. My fingers found the heavy iron lever once more. With a sharp, decisive jerk, I threw the power back on. The warehouse didn't just wake up, it exploded into light. The overhead fluorescents flickered, buzzed, and then settled into a blinding clinical hum. The transition was violent. Tessa flinched, shielding her eyes with a hand that was still stained with the purple theatrical makeup of her bruise. In the sudden harsh glare, she looked pathetic. The Cora persona, the tragic victim, was gone. In her place was a woman caught in a lie so vast it had swallowed her whole. Rhett, please. She started, her voice shifting back into that soft, manipulative cadence. She took a step toward me, her eyes brimming with fresh, well-timed tears. I was just scared. I didn't mean those things. The pressure, the project ghost. It made me lose my mind. You know me. You know I love you. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that even now she was searching for the right script. She was scanning my face for a weakness, a spark of the old Rhett who would do anything to stop her crying. Have you ever been there? That moment when someone who just tried to destroy you suddenly plays the victim again. Drop a stay strong in the comments if you've ever had to look a manipulator in the eye and say, no more. I don't know you, Tessa, I said, stepping back as she reached for me. And the woman I did know, she never existed. She was just the first character you ever played. I turned and walked toward the loading dock, my boots echoing with a finality that seemed to drain the air from the room. She followed me, her pleas turning back into threats, then back into screams. You can't leave. If you walk out that door with that drive, I'll tell them everything. I'll tell the police. You've been keeping me here. I reached the heavy steel door and pushed it open. The cool night air of North Carolina rushed in, smelling of pine and rain, a real, unscripted scent. I stepped out onto the gravel lot, the stones crunching under my feet. I didn't run. I walked to my car, climbed inside, and locked the doors. I pulled the recording device from my pocket and the silver hard drive from my belt. I didn't feel a sense of triumph. I just felt a profound, hollow exhaustion. I reached for my phone in the glove box. I had one more post to make. I logged into the Cora Vance account. The escape fund was sitting at $92,000. I uploaded the audio file, the raw, unedited recording of her admitting to the scam, the fake bruises, and her plan to disappear. I didn't add a caption. I didn't need to. Then I uploaded the bruise tutorial video I had found on her computer. I hit post and watched as the world she had built began to set itself on fire. The comments changed within seconds. The prayers turned into questions, the support into outrage. The digital mob she had cultivated as her shield was now turning into her executioner. I watched the escape fund ticker freeze as the platform's fraud detection kicked in. I want to ask you all something, honestly. Was I wrong to burn it all down publicly? Should I have just gone to the police and stayed quiet? Or did she deserve to be exposed by the same audience she used as a weapon? Let's talk about that in the comments, because I still wonder about it every night. I pulled into our driveway one last time. I didn't take the travel memories or the wedding photos. I took my clothes, my passport, and the hard drive. I left her jewelry box untouched, including the mangled gold earring I had found. As I walked out, I felt a strange light sensation in my chest. For 6 years, I had been an extra in someone else's movie. I had been the stable husband, the anchor, never realizing that the lead actress was rewriting the script behind my back. I'm staying at a motel near the airport now. Tomorrow, the investigators will want to talk to me. Tomorrow, I will have to explain how I caught a ghost in a wine glass. But for tonight, it's just me. I closed my eyes and thought about the real sun, the one that sets without an LED wall. Trust is a fragile thing, a mirror that once broken can never show a perfect reflection again. But I'd rather see the world through the cracks of a broken mirror than through the lens of a perfect lie. I'm not the tragic widower she wanted, and I'm certainly not the monster she tried to create. I'm just a man who looked at a photo and decided to stop being a prop. Thank you for sitting with me through these 4 parts. It hasn't been easy to share this, but if it helps even one of you trust your gut when things don't add up, it was worth it. If you've survived a master manipulator, know that you aren't alone. Subscribe to stay with me for the next chapter of my life, the real one. Stay real, everyone. See you in the next story.